Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Doujinshi, and welcome back to another episode of Hentai Reviews, the only series where today we're going to be asking bigger questions like, what have I ever thought about that has truly ever made me change my perception of something, and what has really shifted the way that I think as an individual? This is a weird one, but trust me, we're going to get into this. Today we're going to be talking about Kyonyuu 𝓗𝓮𝓷𝓽𝓪𝓲 Ojisan Chinpo Episode 1. Done by our friends over at Loon Pictures, L-U-N-E, not L-O-O-N, and running about 15 minutes and 44 seconds. Oddly a little short for most of the ones that I've done. Running at a total of about 11 categories, notable of which are teacher, harem, and the big one of this, UB, ugly bash, not gonna swear this early into the video. Now, hear me out on this one, because this one was an interesting one. Now, before I get into the actual video, I want to say beforehand, first of all, like and subscribe if you want to watch more of these videos. I do them all the time, past that. But my real comments on this is there are two things I want to bring up before I get into this. Number one, music is weirdly prominent in this. If you're watching through this and you're, actually watching it for the plot rather than the plot, take a second and then listen to the background music that plays in this, because it's weirdly diverse and it kind of takes up a lot of the excess time that's in the background of this. And the second is the comments. The comments underneath this one were strangely diverse for the fact of two reasons. Number one, the people who saw the UB title and immediately went off and said, oh my god, I hate this, it's more of the same that I don't want. God, this is just another category I don't want in my hentai. Then there was the second ones. The second ones were praising this for what I stated before, changing your perception on what is there. The Ugly Boys title is really utilized in this less than it is the actual stigma behind the tag itself. And honestly, it was very much praised for the fact that it wasn't as rhymes with grape-y. So yeah, let's go ahead and actually get into the, the thing itself. I'm aware in the beginning of these, I like to talk about the animation first because, well, it's the least important most of the time when it comes to it, because the story can draw you in with less appeal and the plot can really keep you around regardless of what you're there for. But this one I wanted to talk about the story first, so let's go ahead and get into that. And for the ones that I will be putting back here, I will be putting them as the number that they are, and then I'll put, what category they go along with. Now, the story for this one is honestly a little interesting, because this, over its 15-minute and 44-second runtime, which is incredibly short, focuses around a girl and a ugly boy really meeting in an anthology series, as it's 2, 2, and 2 over a course of 3 different stories that's there, and all of them meeting and then eventually talking to each other over the internet and then meeting at a hot springs, because similar circumstances equals similar friendships. And now there is some notes of that. Now that is incredibly quiet when it comes to actual story, because there's not a lot of it. But these characters are also fairly upfront with how they act around it. There isn't a sense of oh no, I'm not actually here for sex. These characters are extremely focused on it, because these girls are the ones that reciprocate or are the initiators of a lot of the things that happen. The first of the anthology is between a principal and a student. The student is the one that starts to lead in towards the actual scenes themselves, or the scene itself, while then having the principal reciprocate reluctantly and then getting more into it. Now, the thing I want to also say about the later stories and this one is that the ugly boys in this are just regular guys, honestly. They're not forcing themselves onto them in a very, can't say it without getting the video taken down, in a very non-consensual way, but they're just generally they are the recipients, and then they are given consent and permission to then go forward with what they're doing. And they're all honestly nice guys who are just like in circumstances that lead them towards something that would be incredibly lucky for a lot of people of their age and, weight. Because these aren't like ugly bastards. They're just dudes, honestly. Like, they're just like, someone who looks like this. Like, it's just a regular guy that you've seen who's in like his 50s. That's all that there is. He's a little overweight because, yeah, he's in his 50s. He's not in shape anymore. But they're not like gross. They're not like disgusting people. They're just guys. Honestly, ugly bastards. Pretty mean of them to put that in the title, but let's go ahead and move past that. Another point of mine is that it progressively gets more upfront with how these characters are getting together and meeting with a short time constraint. The first girl is very like getting around the subject, but leading it towards them getting together, with the next one being a little bit there, but also not as beat around the bush. And the third one is flat out like, hey, wouldn't it be crazy if we whatever. That's really the thing that's around it. And my final point for the story is that the ugly bastards are very respectful, and they only reciprocate the feelings that happen between this. Like, these are very like genuine nice people who aren't there to be like, oh, object of sex I need to be with. They're just like being in a lucky scenario that most people would kill for, and then they're grateful for being in that scenario. Like, the girls are the ones that are being written as like, I want to sleep with you, and the guys are like, really? And then she's like, yeah, and he's like, oh, okay, we can start out. And then they're slow, and then they lead into more as it goes on with each different one. It is the consent and then the raise to them actually being able to get together, which, now that I've talked about it a much, let's get to the animation right before we get to the actual like plot of this, which the story of this, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10 because it knows what it's doing, and it's writing these characters in a way that doesn't push you away. The typical UB trope is that for them to be there's a sense of non-consent because they are larger, the girl is usually petite, and then there's not a lot going around it. But these ones are written as if they're people who are just in a good circumstance. So I'm giving it a 7 for that sake. So let's get into the animation, shall we? Now, the animation is a little interesting as well, where it's not bad, and it is very good, but it's not amazing. Now, the reason I say this is because there are 3 notes that I have on this. Number 1 is that it feels cheap in sections. Sections of it are done with a limited budget and a limited time constraint, which feels the effects of this, but not necessarily to a hard strength of it. Now, you see, the reason I feel as though it's cheap is because there are some small parts where you can see this one like cut is cheap, but the rest of it around it is not. There was definite money and passion put into certain parts of it that then lowered in quality. You see, the first and the last scene of both of these, and when I say scenes, I mean the scenes, are the same, because it is establishing the fact that they all met each other on the internet after they had all gotten together in the beginning, and then showing how they got there, only to then reiterate it at the end. Those 2 scenes are identical of each other, with the exact same like scenes and the exact same narration along with the animation. It is reused 1 for 1. Also, when the actual scenes themselves happen, there is legitimate movement to it. As we all know, animation in these is typically cheap when it comes to, physical movement. When it comes to, things bouncing up and down, it's really looking like a picture is stretched up and down to be there. This one has physical motion, the rolling of fat in the body, the way that hands push in on legs, stomachs, thighs, anything in between. There is movement, and there is solid movement through it. Now, some of it is looped when there are scenes of constant motion in the same thing, but those loops go on for a little longer than they should, but nowhere near the amount of time that you would push them away, which is why I think this has better animation than most things, but not amazing animation. If I had to give this any sort of score, I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. Not because it's the best thing in the world, but because there was a clear time constraint and a budget that was used in sporadic movements. But that good elevates it, where the cheapness it lengthens it. If this was kept throughout, it could have been a 10, but the fact that it had to be stretched lowers it to about an 8. So that's where I'm going to give it for the animation. And now let's go ahead and get into the thing that everybody's really here for. The plot, I would like to say in a so happy congratulatory statement, is not mid and it's not bad. It is, that's the good shit. So let's go ahead and get into why, shall we? Now you see, the first scene of this is a little bit of a bait and switch because it's very fast and then it cuts out immediately. So scene number 1 starts at 10 seconds in, it like immediately, right when the thing's over, right when the opening intro's done, and goes straight into it, and ends at 30 seconds, with it being the general understanding that this is the future, and here is the setup to it, which is the rest of the episode. Really kind of just like a throw in to get your attention, and then the rest of it holds its own. It's a montage. Now, scene number 2 is where it really starts, running from 2 minutes and 45 seconds and going all the way to 5 minutes and 50 seconds. This scene is done with its notable tag of student, because that's probably where the most dynamic in it comes in. Done between the student council president Miyamoto and the principal, who is the UB in question, which he's just a dude. Why is UB there? It just feels mean. Their faces are blurred out 90% of it, and they're really respectful. They're nice people. UB is mean to these guys. And it really goes around her getting around the subject of it, only to then lead into him wanting her to study more, and then her leading him into the scenario, which leads to the scene itself. Probably on the better side of them, in which case it then leads into scene number 2, which is pretty much immediately afterwards. So scene number 2 then comes around, and scene number 2 starts at 5 minutes and 55 seconds and goes all the way to 9 minutes and 50 seconds. This one, the most prominent being the Alabama tag of incest. Now, this one is done by Chika and her uncle, who is a salaryman. It is kind of just like an understanding of her giving him a massage because he works a very hard job and just needs a sense of release and stress, which then comes at her being a nice niece. It's weird, right? But then it goes into the fact, but then it's kind of just a nicer reality between it, instead of a really fucked up one, which then leads into the final scene of it, which has 3 denominations, because the final one is the indication of the end of the episode and where the end of the second part of it. Let's just talk about it. The 4th and final scene of this starts at 11 minutes on the dot and goes all the way to 13 minutes and 40 seconds, with the initial one being between student Anko and the teacher, with the main tag being teacher dark skin, my beloved. I'm so sorry, but you're just not prominent because of how the characters are focusing the situation around it. Oh, it's the greatest garnish in the world. Dark skin is the seasoning that really just emphasizes the flavor of so much else, and God bless it. Oh, I still have that Crusader helmet, and fuck, I would go on a crusade for dark-skinned, big-titty GF. So this goes all the way to the final scene, which ends the this section of it with repeating the first one, going all the way to 14 minutes and 5 seconds, which really just recaps and everything. So let's focus on the main one that goes from 11 minutes to 13:40. That one is pretty much the horniest of them all, going she starts out with the "how about we just get together," and then he's like, "Oh, I didn't realize that," and then gets into it immediately. The scenes themselves throughout are pretty structured, but it's the ending of them that is probably the most structured part, and the beginning of them that leads into it. This is perfect setup for good quality scenes, because there's not a ton of tags in this, but the tags that are there are garnishes that push everything else up to being so much better and so much hotter. This isn't a perfect one, but fuck, it's close. with what it has. There are some tags that are missing. Don't worry about it. 9 out of 10 is the best it can possibly be, but it stands off on my personal opinion. So the reason I say that is because the reason I say it's structured is because the end of it always ends with there is no Boston cream pie, and then there is always a lot of people really liking breastfeeding. Those are the two things that kind of correlate between every single one of them, which then leads into them, you know, at the end of it where they're all happy, euphoria, move on to the next scene. So if I had to give this a rating, I would give it a solid 9 out of 10, because holy hell, this is good. Chef's kiss. Opinionated? Yes. Using what it has in a very good way? Also yes. So we're going to cancel out, call it a 9, because 10 would be something that just hits that extra little spot for me. You can say what you want in the comments. I completely agree with whatever you have to say, if it's reasonable. Let's keep it civil. So let's go ahead and get into the final section of it, shall we? And now for the final of it. I would give this a solid 8 out of 10. Now, the reason I give it that and not higher because of how I viewed the plot of it is because this is good quality stuff. If the plot could have been a little bit more engaging with what it had and just like a minute and a half more where you give that extra 15 seconds to really just like really set the foreplay forward and add the characters into what they have, a little bit more on how they all met each other later on, that lets you like redo the scene in a more like thematic way. I'm not complaining as much as I should, as much as I feel like I'm able to. Trust me, this is more criticism than it deserves, which this video will probably be longer than the actual content itself, but don't worry about it. 8 out of 10 because this is good quality shit and I recommend it highly. H Anime, you are my baby. I love you for this one. Now, I just want to say thank you to everybody. I am super happy I get to do this stupid stuff, and I'm so glad I get to just... This one was very fun for me because I took like proper notes, and I actually have a better setup with how I can review those notes and then also have them like put out. And thank you everybody for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop it there. If you want to watch more of these videos, subscribe if you want. I have a ton more, and I'm making even more of these every single time I make these videos. So thank you everybody. So I'm just gonna call it there. So remember, have a nice day. Don't be a dick. There's too many of them, and wash your fucking hands. I've been the doctor. Peace.